So we'll take a look real quick here at this Karampa, and that was it when it came in and it was producing sperm at that size. And then here's a pic about a year later, and then another pic, same animal, about a year after that. I tried to breed it to a Medu. You can see that Medu in that one picture, and then a kalatoa. Unfortunately, I wasn't successful at either. The kalatoa, she had a large swelling, went to shed, and died. So that was unfortunate, but it happens. And shortly after that, I sold him, and I sold the Medu. And that Medu went to Andrew Acevedo, and then I believe he sent that over to Reach Out Reptiles. Real quick though, I wanted to show this animal. This is this was a really small kalatoa, and he was breeding at roughly 5 feet, but once again with food didn't stay 5 feet, and I to this day I still think there's a marble-like gene floating around in some of the super dwarfs, and if it's not a marble gene, it's something that would work very well when added to marble. And so he was an interesting snake, and then this was one of his offspring. This was the smallest kalatoa ever hatched out, at 29 grams. This was 10 or 12 years ago, I believe, that I produced that, and I was basically the person who started weighing these animals because I saw there was such a drastic difference in these offspring size that it would be a good way to get data for the locality, and it was also kind of a fail-safe for making sure people weren't lying about what they said they had, because you have this size range on every locality that's pretty consistent across the board. And that was 10-12 years ago when I started weighing stuff out. And here's another picture of him, and then a picture of him as an adult, and then one of his siblings, a female that had a much lighter coloration but very similar chaotic back pattern. Another breeding and pair that I want to show is the Medus that produced all the anery Medus. I actually ended up not proving them out. I sold them. I sold the male, then I sold that female when I was getting out of the super dwarfs, just to make room for ternates. And later on, other people had proved out some of those animals to be head anery from that breeding. So I believe this is the only actual established line of Medus in the country that's people are still working with. And there were some other Medu crosses, Medu kalatoa crosses. I made 50-50s, and then I made some 75% Medu, 25% kalatoas. The SD crosses with other SDs seem to make nicer animals than a pure. If you look at the 50-50 Karampa kalatoas, and here is a picture of a 50. I believe this is a 50-50 Medu kalatoa. They were just amazing looking animals. They actually complemented each other really well, and it would be nice to see more of this SD crossing. I mean, everybody's so focused on making pures, and I wish they would make some more SD to SD crosses, just because they make such nice animals, and it's an opportunity to diversify some blood, diversify some genetics, and get some better colors and better patterns. So I just wanted to show those real quick. This is all stuff from 10-12 years ago. Some of those adults that I showed, the kalatoas and Medus, those all came in the country back in early 2000s, like 2002, 2003, around there. So there was a lot of people that was working with this stuff back then. So I know a lot of people think this stuff is new, but it's really not. But one other thing that you hear people talk about a lot is bloodlines, and people were going to try to claim that they can guarantee such and such snake is going to stay small because of the bloodline. Well, you can make a rational argument that if you have two pairs of snakes from the same locality and the one pair is noticeably larger than the other pair, that smaller pair is probably going to produce smaller babies. That's just a given. Okay, that's common sense. But the problem comes in when you take one wild-caught animal or another wild-caught animal and you don't know how they were fed or how much food they had or how old they are, and somebody makes a claim, well, this is a small bloodline because it's X amount of feet. Okay, but what do we know about that bloodline? We know nothing. And even in the stuff that's being produced in captivity, for example, my ternates, I have more. There's more data on ternates than any other retic locality because I've documented it all. And even with all that documentation, I can only still make that logical argument that if I breed my largest pair of ternates together and my smallest pair of ternates together, the smaller pair will produce overall smaller adults with the offspring. I can't actually show you that real world data because to have that real world data, I would have to do those two clutches, raise up all the animals to adulthood, feed them the same exact amount of food, and then measure them all. See, nobody's done that. Nobody has that data to show you. So when people want to talk about bloodlines, the most they can really say is X animal got X feed with X amount of food over X amount of time. And you can make a logical conclusion from that. But you can't really say this bloodline only gets X amount of feed because we don't know all the genes that go into determining overall potential growth for a retic. So there might be some other genes that maybe bump them up a little bit in size or take them down a little bit in size. We really don't know that. So that's the other big technique that I'm seeing now is this concept of bloodlines. And the ironic part is the majority of the people that are making these claims of bloodlines, of small and this and that, are the people that bought up animals after the ban. You really only see a handful of people that were working with these animals prior to the ban on importation talking about bloodlines. And they're the only ones that really can because they have the animals, they have the F1s, they have the F2s. They can make a much more qualified estimation on overall adult size that a lot of these other people who waited till post 2014 to become super dwarf advocates for them to make their claims. So I know it seems like I'm attacking people here, and I'm not trying to attack people. I'm trying to get out good information because I watched what happened to mainlands with gene stacking, with the wrong people buying them, getting too many, and then not being able to manage their collection and dumping them, and wholesaling out babies, and just dumping off animals and just destroying the market, and at the same time destroying the snakes in the process because they all end up dead. So as I said in the beginning of this, there's essentially three types of super dwarf keepers. There's the people that cared about them when they weren't worth much money, the people that didn't start caring about them until they became worth a lot of money, and then there's the last group, the third group, the just found out about them group. And the just found out about them group, it's not looking good for that group because that group is getting fed a massive amount of misinformation, and they're spending a lot of money on animals under the guise that they're going to reproduce and make them a ton of money, or they're going to only get a certain size. So that's something that needs to be understood right away. is, if you're new to retics, especially if you're new to super dwarfs and dwarfs, that you need to ask a lot of questions of the breeder. And if it seems like they're just telling you what you want to hear, then all you have to do is ask for data. If they tell you they have a bloodline that stays small, all you have to say is, well, can you show me the siblings from this bloodline? Can you show me 10% of the offspring of the related offspring? If they can't even show you 10%, which most of them can't, they're not necessarily making it up, but they're making, at best, a judgment call based off the size of a specific animal. And you can't really know the total traits in a bloodline. You can make an educated guess. And I have a problem with these animals being marketed as, one, totally harmless, because they're not, and two, a good beginner snake, they're not, and three, as a hyped up new cool thing for everybody to focus on. Because I need to quit shaking the camera, which I see I'm doing, because all that's going to do is create a bubble for the industry and an excessive amount of reticulated pythons that there aren't qualified keepers for. So as much as it seems like I'm attacking people, I'm really not. I'm just warning the buyers that if somebody tells you a retic that has some mainland blood in it will stay potentially as small as 5 feet, that is misinformation. That is a sales pitch. And I hate to do it like this, and I hate to be this guy, but somebody has to tell the truth, and somebody has to be willing to tell the truth. And not a lot of people want to do that right now, because if enough people believe that a retic will stay as small as 5 feet, even if you feed it properly, just think about how many people feel like they can comfortably manage something a little bit larger. And how many potential sellers will start making similar claims of, well, this is only going to get 6 feet, or this will only get 7 feet. And the new buyer that doesn't know much about these animals will say, well, that's only 2 more feet. Well, that's only this, that's only that. And that's where everybody's going to get into trouble, is with 1 or 2 people claiming bloodlines that are small, claiming all this stuff, and then putting this out there and selling it to everybody. Everybody else in retics is going to see an opportunity to market their animals the same way. And I saw this happen back around 2012, out of the blue one day, because dwarfs had really started to get popular. Almost all the ads on King Snake back then were prehistoric. If there was 8 pages of retic ads, 6 of them were prehistoric, and then it was Nerd, and then it was Bob, and then it was the rest of us. And like overnight, all of a sudden, everything became a dwarf. Almost every ad for prehistoric said dwarf. All of a sudden, Orange Ghost Stripe was dwarf. GC was dwarf. It was like, and then Bob had his stuff. All of a sudden, and it was just like overnight, just pages and pages of dwarfs. And I just saw this shit show start again on Morph Market. All of a sudden, tons and tons of dwarfs with these random ass percentages and no explanation of what went into these snakes and what they actually are. But it's being marketed as superdwarf as dwarf, and it's just happening again. We saw it happen in 2012ish. It's coming back again with the big names. It was, and it's just unfortunate because you have so many people that are going to buy the cheaper dwarf slash super dwarf from whoever who's making these claims, and they're going to buy it because they can't afford the $5,000 for the pure kalatoa pair. So they're going to get something for a G. There was just some chick who just bought some snake with its head all messed up, being told that the adult male use was 5 feet. And it was going to only get like 7 feet. And it's just daily. That's what, if you want to know what retic breeders are talking about, it's all this shit that's going on. And how much it's going to hurt us. That's what's being talked about behind closed doors, is how much all this misinformation is going to hurt the reptile or retic industry in the future. Because if you look at my situation where I'm working with mostly Ternate Islands, I'm totally honest. I showed my largest one. She's 13 feet. I show all of them. I talk about how big they get. I fed them heavily to make them as large as I could make them, so I knew their potential. If I would have not fed these snakes hard, they would all be like 10 feet. The largest would maybe be 11 feet. They all bred. The largest was, I think, 11.5 when she bred. The smallest was 7 feet. 7 feet, that's it. Ternates will breed at 7 feet. I could have fed them in a very irresponsible manner and said, look, they're all 10 feet or under. They're basically super dwarfs. And I could have marketed them that way with misinformation by controlling their size with inappropriate amounts of food. So the honest people, a lot of the new buyers are going to be less likely to buy from because they're going to tell you the reality of the situation and say, well, this is the size of the adults, this is what I would expect them to be, but there's always that possibility of them getting up to that larger range within their dwarf or super dwarf locality. So you need to be very careful and figure out whether you're dealing with somebody who's telling you what you want to hear versus telling you the truth about things. So I would be very careful in the future, and if a snake has mainland blood in it, there's no way it's going to stay under the average length by a foot of what a super dwarf usually gets, which is 6 foot plus. There's no way that a 50% mainland, 50% super dwarf is only going to get 6 or 7 feet. It's only happening if they are starved and not fed. So that is the truth about super dwarfs and dwarfs, how they started, who was working with them, when the second group of people came in, and when the third group of people came in. And I really hope that this new group of super dwarf and dwarf enthusiasts go out of their way to learn as much as they can about them, so they're not buying up more than they can manage, and they're not getting snakes that are getting larger than they would like them to be. The truth is, if you want a snake that only gets 6 foot, you probably shouldn't be buying a retic. Get a carpet python. Get whatever. You don't need a retic if you don't want something that has an aggressive feeding response, has a bad bite, and has the potential to get large enough to kill you. Okay, if you don't want those 3 things, don't get a retic. And if you do get a retic, make sure it is a pure super dwarf, because anything other than that has a potential to get a pretty decent size.